Hi, and welcome to Inspired Startups Startup Events. We're currently at the Hardware Hackathon here in DCU Innovation Centre, co-hosted by the Innovation Centre and PCH International, also in partnership with the Web Summit and the National College of Art and Design. And luckily Airbnb gave us permission to film here in their suite. I'm joined by DC, Head of Growth with Teamwork. So just to give us a brief introduction, DC, tell us a bit about yourself and the passion that revolves around startups.
I guess so. I'm Irish, obviously. I'm from Cork, originally from West Cork. Went to UCC, studied computer science and economics there. Okay. Came out, swore to myself I'd never work in computers or have anything to do with economics and data. So, like many things in my life, that ended badly. So I spent a lot of my early career working in event management. Straight out of college, went to work for a professional event management company, organizing conferences for companies like Microsoft and people like that. So, Web Summit week is a big week for me because, after the first couple of days and I've gone around and costed everything and worked out how much everything costs to put up, which is just that's what happens when you've worked in event management. You just get to sit back and enjoy and watch the incredible event that they've put on.
Sure.
So I suppose my particular area in event management was always launching stuff. Mm-hmm. It was always, we have this product launching, we have this hotel launching, we need to really connect with kind of early adopters and stuff like that. So in my early days, it was very much practically, the let's build stages, let's book bands, let's do this. But what obviously happened is as I kind of got familiar with it and got known for having a kind of a flair for that, you'd find yourself getting invited kind of by the PR companies and the marketing companies back into the meetings earlier and earlier and earlier so that you'd actually end up being the guy who could give the ideas about how to launch something. So I guess that was kind of where the transition into marketing came, in that at that point, I would have had no formal training in marketing. But again, it was just that vibe of being able to work out how to take something that nobody knew about and how to kind of connect in with a customer and stuff like that. So I mean, that's how I ended up in marketing and tech and all that sort of stuff. And I wouldn't do anything else now at this stage.
Okay, so that's your early days, and
yep.
I know now you're Head of Growth at Teamwork.
Yeah.
What do you guys do, and what pain point are you trying to solve?
So teamwork.com is, we like to call it the world's favorite way to get stuff done. Teamwork is a productivity platform. So basically, we help you manage your tasks, projects, milestones, and essentially just in a business, no matter what business you're in, no matter what size you're in, no matter what industry you're in, we provide you with the software where you can keep your people organized. So you can put in all the work that needs to be done. You can assign it out to individuals, or you can let some of it up to individuals to pick themselves to do. You can track deadlines, dates, files, all that sort of stuff. At the moment, we have about 1.6, 1.7 million users around the world, and they vary from. We've got everything from charities and NGOs to, big companies like Disney, eBay, PayPal, people like that using it, right down to we've been very lucky here in Ireland. We have a lot of startups who use it because when they're getting started, they want to keep track of everything that people are doing and stuff. So that's the business we're in.
Great. I'm just looking at your business card here. You describe yourself, it's pretty amazing actually. You describe yourself as a full stack marketeer, 5 out of 5 stars, a deal hustler, 4 out of 5 stars, a super growth junkie, 4 out of 5 stars, and a Kickstarter addict, 5 out of 5 stars. Just to elaborate on a couple of those skills that you have. Firstly, let's talk about the startup topic.
Yeah.
Do you have any favourite growth hacking tips or secrets that you could help early stage entrepreneurs with to build faster and more scalable startups?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is, my other skill that I left off the cards was cheating at top trumps, where I used to always be the guy who would draw in the numbers or the stars at the end of them, I'm obsessed with startups. Startups are both my day job and my hobby as well, because I love seeing people grow stuff that they're passionate about. I love I think there's anything better than seeing somebody who has a passionate idea and they just go for it and go with it. One of the things, you mentioned kind of growth and growth hacking and stuff like that. I have a mixed love-hate relationship with the term.
Okay.
In some ways I think it's a load of nonsense, the term. In other ways, I went to the growth hacking conference in London earlier this week, so I can't be too critical of it. And that was an incredible experience. As a marketeer, you always think, there's nothing new for me to learn from a tactical point of view. You're just looking at different ways of doing stuff. But I learned so much this week at that conference. But I think the most important thing I learned at it is that, growth hacking as a concept is very much about optimization. So, I kind of compare it to, a BMW owners club. You know what I mean? Those guys are passionate about their cars, their vehicles, about tweaking, every ounce of performance out of the engine. But, they wouldn't get very far if they didn't understand the basics of how a car runs. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes startups can over obsess about the idea of growth hacking and, this quick hack to get users and this quick hack to, do this thing on LinkedIn and you'll get 100,000 LinkedIn emails and you can email people, all that stuff. And they forget that, to optimize something, you have to have a basic thing in place. So I think one of the things that I always say to startups is, like, marketing, like any other function in a business, is a process. Like, you do have to plan for it. I get multiple emails every week from guys saying, hey, we're about to put out a press release, you know what I mean? Can you give us any recommendations? And my usual recommendation is you should have started 6 weeks ago. Because, you have to put together lists and you have to do reach out and all that sort of stuff. So I think growth hacking is a great way of kind of getting more out of what you're doing already. But you have to still growth hacking won't talk to you about things like picking your target audience, your branding, your physical brand. I'm still amazed, like, by the amount of startup events you go to and, like, basic stuff like, startup CEOs not wearing their own logos and branding and stuff like that. I mean, there's a growth hack for you. Show up at an event that has 400 entrepreneurs in it in a t-shirt with your company's logo, and suddenly 400 entrepreneurs will know that you're the CEO of that company. I think it's growth hacking, marketing, fit it all together,
Okay.
But I think, like you were saying about tips, genuinely, simple tip, wear the same thing going to work every day. Wear a t-shirt with your startup's logo on it. I mean, every single opportunity that you can take to get your startup's branding out there. I mean, go and buy 2 t-shirts. You know what I mean? It's not a question of, we don't want to do it now. We want to wait until we can order 500 t-shirts. Get one ugly t-shirt with your logo on it and wear it everywhere. It's you're going out networking at all these events, and yet you're making it harder for people to realize, you're the guy. Like, I genuinely went to that Growth Hacker conference in London at the start of the week, 500 people in a room, didn't know a single other person at the conference, and 8 people walked up to me because I was wearing my teamwork.com t-shirt and said, hey, Teamwork, we love you guys, we use your software. And out of those, I've spoken to every one of those since I came back this week, like. So growth hack 1, like, if you have a brand, go use it.
Sure,
like.
some simple tips really just to progress your startup. You're a full stack marketeer that's got extensive experience in marketing small SMEs with no budgets up to, like, global corporations with hundreds of millions of budgets. How do the marketing strategies differ between these two? And do you have any valuable marketing tips for bootstrapping startups? I would. Here's something that people might find unusual. I think it's easier to market when you have no money. I think to kind of start to the other side, like, when you have massive budgets or when you have a lot of money floating around. First of all, it introduces a whole amount of admin into the whole process. You have to be accountable for the money. You have to budget the money. You have to plan. You have to measure results. You have to do all this sort of stuff. And, in some ways, it's very easy. Like for instance, if you have a lot of money to market with, you tend to find yourself going for very traditional advertising mediums. Like, you'll go for stuff that it's very easy to measure and stuff. When you don't have a lot of money, the interesting thing is that you have to stay very, very, like, you can only do small things.
So therefore they have to be very, very targeted. And like if you're a small startup getting up and running, the single best thing that you can have is have like passionate, instead of having 500 people who know roughly who you are, you'd be far better off having 25 or 50 passionate advocates for your brand. So the very fact that you don't have money can kind of force you into that sort of clever marketing to get those, to be very clear about your messaging and all that sort of stuff. And I think, as you scale, you can then scale the amount of money and the amount of resources you spend at it. But I think, in the early days, you're trying for that product market fit. You're trying to just get that name and get that branding out there and stuff. And I think it's really, really important that you're not be distracted. Like when you tend to have a lot of money, you suddenly get into a routine then of going, oh, we'll order 500 t-shirts, we'll order 500 posters, we'll order 500 of this, and you're kind of you don't have that sort of same freedom. The other big difference between the big guys and the small guys is when you're a small guy, you can try stuff and you can get it wrong, and it's not very punishing when you do get it wrong. When you're a big guy, everything is punishing. Like when you're Apple, every single marketing move you make is going to have an effect on your stock price. So like it's a question of every single day the marketing department in Apple go, okay, so today, by the end of the day, we could probably be 50 billion richer or 50 billion poorer just on the basis of what we're doing. When you're a startup, you get to go out and you get to try different logos, you get to try different messaging, you get to try selling to different niches and stuff. And you know what, if you get it wrong, as much as you'd love to think that it's going to be, oh no, they'll be printing it in the paper and all that, like they won't. Like it's hard enough to get good news in the paper. Bad news, it has to be critical. Like unless you ended up killing somebody, you're probably not going to see the paper just because you made a bit of a silly marketing move,
Yeah. And very integral to that would be marketing campaigns and get your name out there. What would be your most favorite marketing campaigns that you were responsible for or for implementing, and what actually made these campaigns a success?
I guess what, if I was saying honest, leaving money, budgets and all that sort of stuff outside of it, I suppose one of the ones that I had both the most fun at and that also I think got achieved what it had to achieve was the work that we did in Trustev. Right. So Trustev was an online fraud company that I worked for up until about 4 months ago. And in the space of its first 2 years of existence, it went from being like a small company in Cork in an office, about the size of not much bigger than this sofa, to now having, offices they now have offices in New York, Dallas, London, or Dublin and Cork anyway. Sorry, they don't have an office in London yet. And it's also it achieved so much. And in those early days, what it was Pat Phelan and Chris Kennedy, the owners, the one thing about them is they're straight up guys. Like they didn't want obfuscation, or they had a very clear message of what the company wanted to do, and they just wanted that out there. They wanted people to know that Trustev was going to solve the problem of e-commerce fraud. They didn't want fluff, they didn't want rubbish, they didn't want the kind of lies and obfuscation that can sometimes happen. They just wanted the story to be told. And what ended up happening was, like over the course of the 2 years, Trustev, like as I said, it was named the top technology startup by the EU Commission in Europe. It won dozens of awards for various different things. It won the top prize, accelerator prize at South by Southwest. But it did all that by just being authentic. Like there was no concerted effort or plan. It was just a case of we used to use social media and we used to use other means to be straight up and say what was going on. Pat, as CEO, used to use Twitter and Facebook and stuff to kind of show people what the day-to-day work was like and all that sort of stuff. So it was very, it was hardly marketing. It was more a case of we were just telling people what actually was going on. But in those early days, in the early days of startups, I think people forget there's two main goals from marketing. One is that you're looking to help sales and product to get that product market fit and to get all the marketing lined up and all that sort of stuff. And then the second element is that genuinely, if you've decided to go down the venture capital route, you're actually also marketing to investors. Because, while investors want to see the product market fit thing, if you're a startup that's generating a bit of profile and a bit of love and a bit of a following for themselves, that does help in negotiations and stuff. So I always say, to startups getting started, like, don't discount the fact that a certain amount of the marketing you're doing is not for customers. It's actually to make yourself, it's, as I said, like, it's the kind of beauty parade of startups, that you have to kind of look pretty for the investors and stuff. And like Trustev was incredibly lucky in that, through Pat's hard work and literally, the amount of air miles that guy put up. But what it meant was, he got, when it came to picking investors, he had a larger pool to pick from, and he picked, an incredible team of investors that essentially now, they're like other partners in Trustev, in the sense that they're not that kind of stereotype of, the investors are making us do this. Trustev, more than any other company I've ever seen, have this incredible relationship with Greycroft, Mangrove, you've got Telefonica, Enterprise Ireland, Act Ventures here in Dublin, where they're all genuinely together because, they have that great symbiotic relationship. Trustev do great work. That gets a lot of good publicity. That reflects well on the investors, and therefore the investors trust them to do stuff, So that's good.
And have you had any experience with badly run marketing campaigns? What do you think went wrong, and what did you learn from the experience?
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody has, and the trick really is, were they so bad that everybody knows about it, or were they just bad and you managed to hide most of it? I think, I suppose I've been lucky. I've never had any massive disasters by anything like that. But you do have things like where, if you're planning something over a long period of time, sometimes the goals and stuff can change in the meantime. So, you had this really clear plan and this really clear message that you wanted to deliver, and then something changes along the way. So, as an example, like when I was in Trustev and we started off, we did a lot of stuff in the early days around social media and how you could use social media to verify somebody's identity and stuff like that. So we kind of came up with a campaign that was designed to show people, who their closest connections on social media were and stuff like that. And I mean, from a technical point of view, it worked because, we got several thousand people signed up and saw it and all that, and it all worked and nothing broke and all that. But I mean, from a marketing point of view, it didn't kind of fulfill its objective because in the intervening period, we had really advanced the technology so that it wasn't just about social anymore. And I suppose when you say about having a failing, then the failing was, of course, that because that we reinforced people's opinion that Trustev was about social media marketing in that. So then we kind of, you ended up then having to try harder again to kind of talk your way around that. So I'm lucky, like, as I said, I've never killed anybody and nothing's ever burnt to the ground. So it's just, as I said, it's small things like that around messaging where, you always want to deliver a really clear message, and sometimes, you can end up kind of making it a bit muddy.
Okay. Do you have any useful tips for the hardware hackathon attendees here this weekend? How should they go about marketing their products, and how different is it to marketing software products? And what should hardware hackathoners here consider as part of their marketing initiative? Yeah,
I suppose it's funny actually, because even the fact that, say, this is the second hardware hackathon here in DCU, I think a lot of people there was a lot of good feedback came out of the last event, when people were able to obviously look at what happened in that and stuff. And I think people realize that, the product is one half of it, but at the same time they'll be asked to present the commercial side of the business and the sales and marketing side of it. And I think the simple truth is, if I could say anything to them, it's like pick a niche, because it's great to have global aspirations for your product, but what you really want here is when you're starting something off, your resources are incredibly limited. So if you're trying to market to too big an audience, it can not work because you're kind of spreading yourself thin. However, for instance, if you're building the world's coolest internet connected pen, for instance, decide, okay, we're going to market it to accountants, you know what I mean? It's going to be the single best device for accountants, and then you can focus all your marketing, your branding, your messaging and everything towards accountants. And if it works for accountants, it's easy then to transition and say, okay, now we're going to market it to banks, or now we're going to market it to lawyers, and eventually then you'll get to the stage where you have the resources to do mass marketing. But in the early days, I think, as well with the judges and stuff like that, it's much easier to tell a story. If you say we're marketing to accountants, it doesn't give judges the room to poke holes in it by saying,
Sure.
well, I'm a lawyer and we couldn't use that, because you're saying, well, we're not marketing it to lawyers, So I would say that's one of the big things really, that when you're building something in a short period of time, that's the way to go. I think then in general, with regards to hardware versus software, hardware again, it is what it is. It's a real world thing. So the big difference, I suppose, between hardware and software is you do have to genuinely think about things like packaging and all that. And it's amazing. You can take a mediocre product, you can put it in incredible packaging, and you can get big effects out of it. And I think these days the standard of packaging has become such a huge thing. And it's funny because it's obviously the packaging design itself has gone almost the route of you look at things like Apple and Android and all this, where less is more. But less usually then requires custom built packaging and all this sort of stuff. But again, if your product is a hardware product, it's going to end up on a shelf somewhere. You might be selling it online, but it is going to end up on a shelf somewhere. So it does have to be visually striking. You do have to be able to look at the box and get a sense of it and all that sort of stuff. For a hackathon, you don't have to think about that things for the big game. Your packaging is probably your single biggest marketing tool, and it's lucky. I mean, these days it's become an art and a science in its own regard, so there's plenty of information and stuff out there. But it's nice just when you're starting off, to have an indication of, do you want to be Apple? Do you want to be minimalist? Blah 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 blah. Or do you want to be, fun, cool, funky packaging? What direction do you want to go in? I think that's probably the biggest difference between software and hardware is that physical presence, that hardware is always going to give you. So people are going to be able to touch and feel your product. So therefore, you have to know what the touch and feel is. Is it going to be, plasticky? Is it going to be aluminium? Now we're so used to this brushed aluminium and polished aluminium and all this stuff that all the phone manufacturers have thrown to us, that now, when we pick something up, a product, touch might have nothing to do with the product, but that basic sensation might be what tells us, is this an expensive product or a cheap product? So therefore, is that going to set our expectations of how the hardware should perform,
Sure, and I suppose if you want to be successful in the hardware or software startup world, you have to be able to have good hustling skills. What, in your opinion, would make a good hustler?
Yeah, the hustler one is a funny one actually, because I get asked a lot about this a lot of times, especially by my mother, because my mother has convinced herself that hustling is flim flam artistry, and selling snake oil and this sort of stuff. Whereas I like to think of hustling as I don't like to think of hustling as conning anybody out of things. I think it's just that kind of persistent passion. You know what I mean? My hustle hero is probably Ari Gold from Entourage, you know what I mean? Where he can be a pain in the hole and all that, but I mean the whole point is that whatever you're trying to sell, you have to be passionate about. And if you try, to a certain degree, if you try and fake that passion, that's where you end up with the bad side of hustling. That's where you're, if you're faking the passion, then you're just trying to deceive the other person, you're trying to con the person. Whereas what you want in a startup of any kind is you want somebody who is genuinely passionate about the product, somebody who is convinced that, yes, customer, this is the product for you, and that same person then, they have to know the product so well that they can spot the opportunities. So, they can be here at they can come here to the hackathon to hustle for their product. And it's not just sales they're looking for, they're also looking for contacts, they're looking for connections. They might not be looking to close a sale today, but they might go, God, hey, that guy over there, he works for Walmart or Tesco's or something like that. In 2 years' time, we're going to want to get in there. So maybe I want to be friendly to him here. Maybe I want to get his business card. Maybe I don't even want to tell him about our product. Maybe I just want that connection. And I think that's what hustling is it's just being kind of commercially aware enough to spot the opportunities that for a product. And as I said, in time you can plan to act on them, you can take the information home to your sales team or your marketing people or whatever like that. But I think there's no point in putting somebody out representing your product who's unsure about the product or unsure about what it does or isn't just the most passionate person about the company. It's kind of it's that kind of evangelist really that you want out there, that from my point of view, I'm a marketeer. I have a computer science background, but I can still go out and I have a fair sense of, when people start asking me about our API or our developers or the code base, like I know enough about that to be able to go through, like, so I don't lose any credibility if they start asking me questions about that, and it'd be the same if I was putting anybody publicly out to speak on behalf of Teamwork. They'd have to know enough that they could kind of speak confidently about it, I suppose.
And a lot of in the startup scene now recently, they're trying to get funding through the Kickstarter scene, and I know you're a huge Kickstarter addict. Why would you recommend startups in pursuing Kickstarter as a campaign to raise funds, and what other considerations should they take prior to launching a Kickstarter campaign?
I suppose it's two different things. One, I suppose the Kickstarter thing itself. Yeah, I think I've backed. I think I've backed about 110 projects on Kickstarter, and I think I've got a good 40 or 50 on various other platforms like Indiegogo and stuff like that. What I like about it is usually it's very clever stuff. Like usually it's somebody who has a massive passion for a particular type of product. My personal, vice is bags. So you get these engineers and stuff like that who spent their lives building jet engines, and then they're like, and yet I never had the right bag going to work that would fit my laptop, a book, my gym shoes, and something else, and that'd be it. So Kickstarter gives them an opportunity where they can come in and they can say, hey, I'm an industrial engineer, here's my problem, does anybody share my problem? I'd love to build this, but you know what, it's 100K to build that initial run of stuff, and I have no background in manufacturing bags. But yet, he can build the credibility, through other routes. And I suppose, why is it good for startups? It's good because it kind of separates, as I said, the men from the mice, in the sense of the first thing that any responsible investor is going to look for is product market fit. Are you building something that people want? And nothing will validate that more than saying, well, actually, we've already sold 50,000 of this through Kickstarter. Yeah. So it means that you, not only did you have the idea, but you actually had the passion to go out and do something about it. So that old excuse of, we can't advance our project until we get funding, that's no longer an excuse, because you can put your project out there for the world to see, and they either want it or they don't. And I think in a lot of cases, it also solves that problem of founder blindness, where you're convinced that your idea is the best in the world. And on paper, it looks like a tremendously good idea. But the reality is, and you talk to all your friends and family, and they all say, this is an amazing idea, we'd all buy this. And then you put it up on Kickstarter and you say, okay, give me your $20 now to buy it. And they're like, I'll do it later, or something like that, So you're kind of, you're kind of literally, you're just putting yourself out there for the world to see. And, what's the worst that can happen? I've seen projects, some of the best projects I've ever backed are ones that went up on Kickstarter, failed, or didn't reach their goal. The guys went back, the guys got feedback on what didn't work, and they basically came back and they launched a second version of the project. Can
you give an example of maybe your favorite Kickstarter campaigns that you did back? What did you like about them?
Yeah, these are all going to be bags. I suppose my two favorite ones were one from about a year ago called the Soot Electro Pack. I think it's www.soot.me.
Sure.
They were ex-Apple product designers, and they built this fabulous carry-on bag that came with a 1400 amp battery for charging your iPhone and iPad. They were very informative throughout the campaign, and then even once they finished raising the money, they posted a load of photographs of stuff being manufactured in the factories and all that sort of stuff. And they had I suppose the simple truth is they had problems. Like they had a problem with shipping, they had a problem with one of the materials, but they literally came straight out and said, hey, you thought you were getting these in October, it's now going to be December. They were good about the information, and I think that's a very important thing, because there was another project, probably my second favorite project then was a bag called the Ember bag. And they had, the design was amazing, all that sort of stuff, and I think it got about 200 grand in backing or something like that. And it was a beautifully designed bag, but again, like they create a lot of issues for themselves by not having the communication as good. So like right up until the bags actually arrived in the house, you weren't entirely sure if you were getting the right thing. So I think it's like in any business, the level of communication with your customers is frightfully important. In particular here, where on a crowdfunding platform where they'd have no reason almost to trust you, you know, and that, I know that was one of the big complaints or one of the big worries about crowdfunding is, you know, oh, you're giving people the money and there's no guarantee you'll ever get it, you know. Well, like I'm 110 projects in, I've never not got it. I've gotten it 3 to 6 months late, but I think again the simple truth is you have to approach all of them as what you're doing is you're kind of buying prototypes or you're buying rough versions, you know what I mean? You're actually, and I suppose they all make it very clear, like you're donating towards this first generation of business and they are kind of gifting you with one of the first ones. You're not pre-ordering something, you know, that's a different business model, you know. I pre-order stuff a lot as well.
Right. And probably some similarities. I know you yourself, you've been responsible for like funding something like 60 to 80 startup projects. And just also, we recently interviewed Christina Lumnia from Thoughtbox, and she said one of the biggest challenges facing startups once they leave an incubator, an accelerator, is trying to get funding to progress their startup further. Could you share any insights on this with your own startup journeys?
Yeah, definitely. So I know Christina. They'd be what we call Wayra cousins. All the companies that ever go into Wayra, we all tend to kind of stay in touch and stuff. And Thoughtbox were actually in Wayra at the same time as Trustev. I think it's a really unusual thing because obviously, yeah, you know, Ireland has a great thing in that we have a wide range of incubators here, both from, you know, NDRC, Wayra, Dogpatch, those sort of things, and then you have the commercial ones, MasterCard StartPath. There's the Accenture running a new fintech one, I think, that's starting in a few weeks' time. You know, you have Propeller down in Cork. We've got Ignite. We've got Rubicon. Bank of Ireland just started one. Like, there's a huge ecosystem of them there. But I think one of the, I suppose it's a kind of a thing where we're also very funny about how we do it, because if you look at other countries, incubators and accelerators, first of all, are two completely different things. They're two completely different models. An incubator is usually, you know, it is, being honest with you, it is what it is in a hospital. It protects, you know, a newborn infant, in this case a startup, from the outside market, you know what I mean? So it gets time to build itself up and grow and stuff like that. And then ideally you take it out of the incubator and it can survive. Yep. An accelerator is usually a company that actually is essentially an existing and working company, and what it's looking to do is massively scale. So if you go to other countries, that distinction is very, very clear. Here, the terms are kind of used interchangeably, and it says that what you were saying there about Christina and Thoughtbox is obviously that simple truth of, you know, now you have a startup that's exposed to the outside world. They're trying to raise the funding to kind of stay alive and keep going and stuff like that. And you know, how can they do that? I think it comes back to the simple fact of you know, you have to look at how fundraising works as a model. Like Teamwork as a company has never taken outside funding. It's been entirely bootstrapped from day one. It's given us a lot of freedom in terms of how we make decisions. Okay. It means that the only outside influence on our company is customers. So, you know, it's a nice place to be. Trustev was a company, you know, we took the largest seed funding round in Europe ever, 3.5 million. And again, it was just a different business model. Like, I'm not saying it was better or worse than being bootstrapped, but, you know, different companies will have different advantages. I think the one smart thing though is, you know, when Trustev did do its funding, like, you do it in stages. And like, the simple truth is that no kind of professional venture fund is going to fund your product development. Like, you know, you have to have that bit where you come up with your initial idea and you get the bare bones, ugly as hell version of it up and running. Nobody's going to pay you to do that. Like, that's the pain of being an entrepreneur, you know what I mean? If you want to be paid for that stuff, then you got to go out and get a job somewhere. If you want to be an entrepreneur, then you've got to take the pain and eat the super noodles and all that sort of stuff to get that minimum viable product done. Once that's done, you go out, and I suppose maybe at that point then, once you have a minimum viable product, that's the point at which maybe you look at an incubator, so that you can go in and the incubator can help you through getting that one first customer. Because if you can come out of an incubator with, you know, an MVP that works, that somebody has said to you, hey, yeah, I will pay, you know, I would happily have that in my company and happily pay for that service, then at that point it becomes an interesting proposition to venture capital companies. But I mean, most venture capital companies, first of all, it's not their money. They've gotten the money from the next level up in the food chain, private wealthy individuals and stuff. They are accountable to those guys. They have to return money on their fund. It's not they're not the national lottery, so therefore they are usually prohibited from, they have to only invest in the ones that have no risk, or that had the minimum possible risk. And I don't think startups in a lot of cases look at it at that perspective. They kind of think of, they don't do themselves any favors by not helping the partners in the VC funds from mitigating the risk, and from basically, they know there's going to be risk in it. But I mean, if you've got a product and a customer who's willing to buy it, the risk is about as low as they're ever going to get. So that makes the decision easy. If you're going to the VC saying, we still have to finish building the product and we haven't been out talking to customers and stuff, I mean, that's a massively risky proposition. And, they might like you and they might love having cups of coffee with you and talking about stuff. But I mean, their fund, isn't going to allow them invest in you. It's going to be that simple. So I think a bit more understanding of the process and a bit more, work on your product and a bit more understanding of, in terms of the investment scenarios, a bit more understanding of, and I mean, you can usually ask the VCs, you can say, look, your fund, what sort of limitations are there? Are you going to invest in early stage, seed stage startups this year? Yes or no? If they say no, then you go, okay, look, we'll have as many cups of coffee as you want, but at least we know now you can't invest in us at this stage. But maybe you're having this conversation with us now because, the next time we go raising money, you want to be in there. So I mean, I think startups need to understand a lot more about how the investments work.
All right. Okay. Some great advice there on what startups need to do to get to that next stage. Thanks. Just regarding your own entrepreneurial journey, have you any horror stories that you could share with us? What did you learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has, because I mean that's the thing, isn't entrepreneurism is about the highs and the lows. You'll never talk to an entrepreneur who doesn't have a horror story in them. That's what I mean. I don't know if you know about it. That's what this Thursday is about. We every year there's a kind of an event run at the Web Summit called Flounders, and it's basically it's Alcoholics Anonymous for startups. It's just a chance for us to go and get them out there. I would say, I suppose, I've been less lucky, in that I've had failures, but they've always been ones we've recovered from.
Sure.
There's ones where, there's been debt associated with them, but you've been able to pay it back and stuff like that. I guess the one that I learned the most from was years. I mean, in my early 20s, I got into a business where I was importing. This is when we were all in Crazy Town. I started importing super premium vodkas. It was whatever 50 quid a bottle type stuff. Really high end, great branding, great exposure worldwide, and all that sort of stuff. They went on to sell it to Bacardi for 500 million or something like that. But we launched small in Ireland, but we had an amazing 2 years. We did Playboy's first party in Ireland. We were the drink supplier to it. We did the launch of Harvey Nichols when they came here to Ireland. We were in the Four Seasons to Dylan. It was that kind of glitzy, thing that you loved. And then from a commercial point of view, as I said, we were getting into good accounts and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, what I suppose the simple biggest lesson I learned from it was that, again, you first of all never trust anybody else for your numbers. So your accountant is telling you great stories, but if you don't understand the logic behind them, there can be debt and stuff building up there. So that's why even to this day, even from a marketing point of view, with analytics and all this sort of stuff, I'll never trust the first number I ever see. I'll always need to know exactly what's behind it, because the issue that we hit with the vodka was we were building this great brand and great exposure and all that sort of stuff. And we had a certain amount of our stock, a couple of thousand bottles or cases that we used to give away, and do for events and, promotions and all this sort of stuff. And of course, never, we were a long way in before we remembered that every time we gave away a bottle for free, we owed the government 17 euros in tax and duties on it. So you'd be quite kind of thinking, I'll just take a case out of the warehouse there and give it away, for that, forgetting that every case you were giving away was basically costing you 80 or 90 quid. And it was more to do with, all the numbers were there. It wasn't that this was something that was hidden. All the numbers were there, but because, we weren't doing proper analysis on our margins and what it was like, for instance, we were looking at these parties and events from a profile point of view, but it was only then eventually we got to the stage where we did the maths and we kind of said, okay, when somebody would say to us, oh, there's going to be 300 people at the event, we then had built out eventually metrics where we could multiply that and kind of go, okay, so theoretically it costs us €4 per person per event, and you could work it out. But I mean, it hurt like hell at the time because, I mean, as I said, we were left with big bills on it. Mm-hmm. But as I said, what it did do is make me realize that, like, you know, no matter, even whether it's a software product or a hardware product or whatever like that, you have to know your margins. You know, with software, you might only be paying somebody 20 quid a month for your web hosting at the moment. But I mean, if you scale to 100,000 customers, suddenly that 60 quid a month becomes 60 grand a month. Right. And, you know, you've never taken into account the fact that hosting was going to cost you money, you know. Mm-hmm. You see it a lot with startup business plans where, you know, every number for every month in every category, you know, rounds up to something because they're guesses. Mm-hmm. And in some cases they're just letting a lot of this stuff out. So I think the hardest lesson I ever learned is definitely just around metrics and numbers, and in particular I think margins. Like, you have to know, even if it's a software product you're selling, if you're selling something for 49 quid a month, you have to know that your break-even point is 20 quid a month. So if you say to somebody, I'll give you a 10% discount or 20% discount, or you have to haggle on something, you have to know the point of no return, the point at which you're actually losing money on something. And I don't think I'll ever make that mistake again.
It's a good enough horror story. Yeah. I know you've been responsible for starting up a new startup initiative in Cork called Built in Cork. Why did you decide to start up this initiative, and what do you think it's going to bring to the startup community in Cork?
So I suppose it came about as a consequence of travel. Like, it came around as a consequence of, you know, being in Dublin and being in the States and being other places, and seeing that, like, one of the great things about the startup community compared to any other business community is that, like, they talk and they share information. And like, in particular, what I loved about Dublin was, you know, you came to Dublin every week. No matter what day of the week you came, there was always a startup event of some description or something that would be of value to startups that night. And you could go along and you could actually talk to people. They would basically say, hey, well, we're building this, or we're fundraising at the moment, or we just went out and got our first customers, or whatever. And then, you know, you'd come up a couple of months later and you meet the same guys, and if they were still talking about fundraising, you'd kind of go, wonder what's going on there. But then if they were suddenly talking about, and we just got new offices, like, you could tell a lot about how serious a startup was just by the information exchange. Cork's a small place, but even though it's a small place, like, I've got a mailing list of nearly 3,500 what I call startup folk in Cork. And, you know, every time we do run an event, we get, you know, somewhere between 150 and 300 people. So, I mean, for a small place, like, we've got a good community. What we were totally lousy at was communicating with each other. Okay. And in particular, as I call them, telling the stories that people needed to hear. Not the, sure, everything is great, but the, I just got completely screwed by X, or this sort of stuff. So the idea behind Built in Cork is very much, I've taken it from, and by taken I mean stolen, the idea from, you know, there's Built in Colorado, Built in Denver, Made in New York, and all they are is essentially, it's just a series of events we're running. It's not designed to compete with any organisation.
So it's not going to rival the Dublin scene.
It's you know what I mean. Being honest with you, like, it wouldn't have happened at all, like, without the support of people like Gene Murphy and Owen Costello and the guys in Startup Ireland. What it is it's a kind of a chance for us once a month to get into a room and speak very plainly. Like, there is a lot of cursing and bad language goes on at our events, because genuinely what we want is, when we go in and we pick a topic like sales, we don't want kind of, here is a PowerPoint version of how you sell in a startup. We want to hear, like, we spend half of the event, we spend a good solid hour with a panel of 5 people on stage and just nothing but questions from the audience. And it's amazing what comes out in that, because literally we pretty much keep going until every question has been exhausted from the audience. So, I mean, the purpose behind Built in Cork is very much knowledge transfer. It's not about, you know, it's never going to be about running conferences. It's never going to be about it's never, ever, ever going to be about making money. Because I pay for some of the events myself. We've also, Microsoft have come on board as part of their BizSpark initiative, and they've kindly, like, thrown money into the pot. But I mean, again, like, they've thrown money into the pot not to make anything Microsoft centric, but just, so now the other issue we have in Cork, and it seems like a thing that Cork people will be bitching about, is the great thing Dublin has some great venues.
Sure.
If you want an event, you can go to Google. They'll give you an event. You can go to Engine Yard. You can go to, even to be honest with you, you can go to a lot of the pubs and bars. Funny thing, Cork doesn't have a lot of function rooms.
Okay.
So we genuinely had a problem when it came to organising community events in Cork about venues. Now that we have built in Cork, we can book a venue every month, and we've supported other groups like developer groups and stuff like that want to run events by literally doing nothing more than, guys, you book a room there, we'll pick up the tab for you, just so that you can, again, like, so long as it's about knowledge transfer, like, we'll help back anything that we can, like.
Yeah, it's great that you've took up a new initiative and actually accomplished what you set up to do.
It's been great. Like, it's as I said, it's been great. I mean, we've gotten a nice little core group together to do it. So it was founded by myself and Jane Ronayne from Connect Again. So we also have there's an age gap there, which is great as well, because Jane is brilliant at bringing in the younger end of the community, the kind of those in their 20s and stuff like that. And then my end of it is trying to bring in maybe the guys with a bit of experience to kind of share the knowledge. Like, so it works really well that way.
And how can the online community find out more about Built in Cork?
So at some stage when we're not up the walls, we have our website at builtincork.com, but it's not live yet.
Okay.
But at Built in Cork on Twitter and at Built in Cork in Facebook as well.
Great.
And you can generally talk to most Cork people. I mean, we tend to find it's the second Wednesday of every month, and you tend to find a lot of activity around social media when it happens and stuff like that. So.
Okay, and I know you're also involved in the Startup Weekend happening at the end of this month, November. Can you give us some heads ups on that and some dates?
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting this year. So, I mean, Startup Weekend has been incredibly successful in Ireland. Like, the last one in June in Google was actually the largest Startup Weekend event ever in Europe. And it was superbly put on. Like, the Dublin team here did an incredible job. And so basically, because it's been so successful, and the same, we've had one in Cork already this year, people have been just asking for more and more and more. So there was kind of Gene Murphy, the main organiser for Startup Weekend in Ireland, came up with this idea that there's a week in November from I think it's the 15th to the 22nd or something, which is Global Entrepreneurism Week. So what we've done is that the first weekend of that week is Startup Weekend Galway, which is a kind of a new initiative for the guys up there. So we've kind of let them on their own there. And the following weekend then, which I think is the weekend of the 22nd, is Cork, Dublin and Galway, or Cork, Dublin and Limerick are all doing theirs on the same weekend. It sounds like that's a mad idea. It sounds like there's competition. In fact, it's the entire opposite. The actual collaboration between the cities, the four cities, has been incredible. And it's meant that we've been able to kind of balance out things like making sure that there's enough good mentors going to each of the events and stuff like that, and make sure that we have good quality judges. It also means that Gene has been able to go and kind of get, as well as the local sponsors that we've signed up, he's been able to get kind of, he brought on Bank of Ireland as a sponsor to kind of help with the costs across all the events and stuff like that. So if anything, like, it's going to be an incredible weekend just to be, even being nosy on Twitter for the weekend. Like, you're just going to see, I mean, literally that weekend, you're going to see the best part of 50 new companies created in Ireland, which is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, I've already registered for the Dublin one, so I'm looking forward to it myself.
I'd love to see if we could get somebody to go and do all three.
Kind of a marathon.
That's it, yeah, marathon, startup marathon.
Just final question. I've noticed downstairs you got some really cool scooters down there. Just as seeing, like, what do you like about them, and we're just interested if we can have a go on them.
Yeah, the scooters are brilliant. So I'm massively interested in mobility, because I kind of dislike cars. I kind of dislike cars in their kind of current function. I don't know why. I've never been a car guy, I suppose. I'm fascinated by electric cars. And until Tesla kind of open a full-scale operation here in Ireland, the scooters are probably the next best thing. So the two scooters that are downstairs are called GoPeds, and they're provided by a company called Ben Scooter Shop. Ben is one of the smartest CEOs in Ireland, even though he's only kind of 10 years of age. So Ben Scooter Shop, I say a lot of the credit for it goes to the chairman of the board, Gavin Burke, who is a VC here in Ireland, and I suppose has young sons who found something that they were passionate about. And Gavin literally went to the States and found a family-based company over there that builds these entirely in the US and all that sort of stuff. And they're just incredible fun. Like, I mean, they they're not just fun though. Like, I mean, they are technically very practical. Like Gavin, I know, for instance, uses his as his daily transport. He literally goes from Ballincollig to Kent Station in Cork, gets the train up to Dublin, and goes from Houston Station out to his office in Blackrock. Like, you get anything up to, I think, 20 kilometers an hour on them. And, you know, you'll get a range of, again, anything between 30 and kind of 50 kilometers on them. So, I mean, you know, you can see they're very, very popular. I mean, when I was in London last week now, you'd see that the equivalents, you know, the fold-up electric bikes, the scooter itself folds up. I know, you know, there's a half a dozen of them around Dublin now at the moment, and literally you can take them in places. They charge very simply. It's kind of like plugging in your laptop charger, and genuinely, I've seen people have them in cafes where it's literally just like that. They just bring them in, they fold up, and you can charge them away. Like, so, you know, these are the sort of things where I think in particular in Ireland, it'll be interesting. I think the adoption will be quite slow, but at the same time, I think the adoption will kind of happen because, you know, we've all been waiting around for our public transport system to improve dramatically, and I think we've all kind of assumed that will only happen now to a certain degree. So I can see, you know, the success of things like the Dublin bike scheme here, and the fact that that's being replicated in Cork and other places. I think that means that you're going to see more and more of these kind of unusual methods of transport, especially over short distances. You know what I mean? Like for instance, in London, car ownership is a sign of sheer luxury, because the sheer cost of running a car in London is ridiculous, given that you have alternatives. In Dublin, I think anybody can live in Dublin these days without a car for the most part. Cork, the demographics of the city means that you probably can't yet. But I think you'll find, you know, you won't like you're not going to get 20% of the population scooting to work. But I mean, I think all these little bits will help relieve congestion in a way, you know, and they're a bit of fun.
Yeah, well, just before we have a go on the scooters, I'd just like to thank DC Head of Growth at Teamwork for talking to us today. And that'll conclude our Inspired Startups talk for the hackathon event here at DCU Innovation Campus and PC International.